your outdoor learning and your local outdoor spaces. So this is part of the Be Wild project funded by Heritage National Lottery. My name is Christina and I'm a tutor with the Field Studies Council based out at lovely Millport. We've come down to our beautiful coast today with a little seal bobbing around in the background just 5 minutes before we started, so keep your eyes peeled for that. The Field Studies Council is an environmental education charity and aims to connect everyone with the environment and to help them appreciate its benefits, but also to help understand how we can protect it as well. So this week I've been delivering a range of sessions to hopefully give you guys some inspiration for how you can use your local outdoor spaces and outdoor learning with young people. So whether you are out in the wilderness or whether you are in the middle of a city, the outdoors is still a fantastic location to use with young people to help their learning, their personal growth and development, increase their confidence, but also just for a bit of good old-fashioned fun as well. And particularly in these very strange circumstances that we find ourselves in, there really is no better time to get your young people outdoors and connecting with the environment. So how each session will work is you'll have a live introduction from me, where I'll be kind of setting the scene and letting you know what's to come. I'll then introduce our main session and then we'll follow up with a live question and answer session. So each session has an overall theme that is then jam-packed full of different activities and session ideas. There'll be tools and resources that you can use to facilitate your outdoor learning. And we'll also be discussing ways you might adapt the sessions to suit different age groups, different environments, but we'll also be discussing a bit of health and safety and group management as well. Lots of things to do. This session we are down on the rocky shore, so we're going to be looking at activities you can do maybe on the coast with your young people. But these activities are also going to be transferable over to freshwater environments as well. If you joined us for our previous sessions, on Monday we looked at Marvellous Mammals, on Tuesday we looked at the world on our doorstep, and then yesterday we were hunting for Minibeasts. Now those 3 sessions are still available on the YouTube page, so you can still go back and watch them if you didn't manage to catch them live. And then finally we're wrapping up tomorrow with our very last session, which is Bushcraft and wilderness skills in the outdoors. So we've covered lots of things already, but there's still some more good stuff to come. Now, if you do have any questions at any point during the session that you want to submit for me to answer live at the end, you can email them over to us, which is our questions@field-studies-council.org. That's the email address. But also today, we've opened up our live chat box on YouTube as well. So if you do have any questions, you can also pop them in the chat box as well. So please feel free to submit your questions and we will be happy to answer them. But for now, let's get started with our 4th session now, the rocky shore. So we in Scotland are incredibly lucky. Scotland has a staggering 18,000 kilometres of coastline, including all the islands. And it's a truly brilliant environment to bring young people to help them create long-lasting memories. Simply being in the coast or being by the sea has measurable benefits for our mental health. So coastal air has more negative ions in it than sort of regular air does. And these negative ions, when we breathe them in, it causes us to absorb more oxygen. And this increased absorption of oxygen causes more equalised levels of the hormone serotonin in our body, which just causes our mood to lift and causes us to feel more positive. The other thing is that when we sit and quietly kind of watch the waves or listen to the waves when we're by the coast, this brings on a sort of mental state known as soft fascination. And this is also known to lift our mood. So literally, being outdoors, particularly in the coast, has scientific measurable benefits to increase our health and our mental well-being. So, what better reason do you need than to get outdoors with young people? Now, the coastal environment that we're going to be focusing on today is something known as the rocky shore. And the rocky shore is an environment and habitat that's really common across all parts of the UK, both east and west coast. And it basically just means beaches that are predominantly made up of boulders and rocks rather than sand. And an incredible environment to go exploring with young people. So we have a whole range of different animals that you can see down there. And these areas are really heavily impacted by the tides. So the tides, of course, is this force, causes the water to come in and out twice a day. And all the creatures that live on the rocky shore are marine creatures. So they've adapted for life, underneath the waves. When they live on the rocky shore, they have to survive being uncovered by water twice a day, which is massively difficult for a marine creature. So what we see with all these animals on the rocky shore is they have some incredible adaptations to help them survive. And many of them are beautiful, many of them are a little bit weird and wonderful. So if you've tuned into any of our other sessions, you'll know that I like a little quiz at this stage in the video. So I'm going to start off with our quiz for the rocky shore, which is called You Have What? So you need to take these with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to be showing you, not pictures this time, I'm going to be showing you some sentences. And these are adaptations that certain animals have on the rocky shore to survive. So I'll show them for about 10 seconds, and then you have got to try and work out what animal they correspond to. Okay, so I'll reveal the answer after about 10 seconds, but you have to have a go and think about what animal it is. Okay, so we'll get started with our quiz for this session. You have what? So here we go, is our first one. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this adaptation was, the tip of my tongue has the strongest biological material ever recorded. And this is the common limpet. So hopefully you'll all be fairly familiar with limpets, and those little triangle shaped shells that you see on rocks, you know, that are often clamped down. And they have this organ called a radula, which is basically their tongue. And at the tip of that radula is the strongest biological material ever recorded. And they use that to rasp seaweed or microalgae off the rocks. So there we go, very cool. Next. Really take this one with a pinch of salt. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is one that some of your older young people might really enjoy. I have the longest penis in relation to body size in the animal kingdom. So this is our humble barnacle. So barnacles are little crustaceans that live in these little individual shells. And they are sessile, they don't move once they're an adult. You know, they stay fixed to the rock their entire life, but they still have to reproduce, and they need to reproduce with as many barnacles as possible. So their method of reproduction, they have evolved the longest penis in relation to body size in the animal kingdom. So essentially, when they're underwater, these little openings, this little top of the shell will open, the penis will extend, and it'll dot around and fertilize as many barnacles in the area as it can. So the longer the penis, the more juveniles, the more people or barnacles they manage to fertilize. There we have it. And our last one, I'll hold it to there so you can't see. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So our last one there was, I eject my stomach through my mouth and digest my food externally. I can also regrow my stomach if I lose it. And this is our common starfish. But all starfish, or pretty much all starfish, are able to do that. So they eject their stomach when they want to feed. Their stomach literally leaves their body and goes onto the prey that it wants to digest. Everything gets digested externally and then swooped back in again through the mouth. And most starfish, if they accidentally lose their stomach, you know, if they're interrupted mid-meal when they're out and about feeding, they can just move off, leave their stomach behind and regrow a new one. So you can imagine some of those facts are particularly good to use with young people. Lots of really fascinating animals to find out on the rocky shore. Now, the really key thing that we'll be talking about throughout this session is health and safety around this environment. And it's really important to be aware of tide when you're wanting to plan this sort of session. So tidal information for your local area can be accessed online, you know, just by a simple Google. And knowing when those low tide periods are when you want to explore the rocky shore is really key for when you are planning or risk assessing this sort of session. Now, what we're looking to do in this session, some of the things that we're going to be covering. First of all, we're going to be discussing, you know, the area of the rocky shore and looking at some of the animals that you find there, some of the conditions. We're then going to be talking about how you might conduct a safe bio blitz and some of the activities you might do around that. And then we're going to finish off by looking at activities that you can do with young people to look at plastic pollution and litter, which is a really prevalent topic at the moment, particularly around our coasts, and it's really important for young people to be aware of. Okay, so that's what we've got in plan. I'm going to introduce now our main session. So the video will start playing in just a moment. The video will last for about 25 minutes or so, and then you'll be brought back to me live where I'll be answering your questions. And again, you can submit those questions via email, which our email address is questions@field-studies-council.org, or you can submit them in the live chat box, which should be present on the YouTube there. But the video is just about to come, so thank you very much, and we really hope you enjoy.
The rocky shore is an incredible habitat to connect young people with the marine environment, somewhere that they might not really have had much connection with before. There's a huge manner of activities you can do on the rocky shore, including the ones that we're going to be looking at in this session. Scavenger hunts, environmental art, sound maps, nothing is off limits. As leaders, the outgoing tide kind of opens this door for us to this habitat, and we can access it and help young people create really long-lasting memories. I absolutely remember all my rock pooling adventures as a child, North Berwick, St Andrews and the Ayrshire coast, and I'm sure a lot of you will be the same. Now, we highly recommend taking young people to visit a coastal environment if you can, because it's an incredible environment to visit. However, we understand this isn't possible for everyone, so all of these activities that we're going to look at can also be applied to freshwater environments like ponds and rivers. To start off this session, first of all, with a bit of health and safety and group management. Group management and planning are really key behind this sort of session, and we highly recommend that you visit the site that you're planning on bringing young people to on a number of occasions, just to see how it changes on a day-to-day basis and just to ensure that it's safe and that you know the site well. The first thing we're going to consider is weather. So wind is probably the most important weather element to consider if you're wanting to visit the rocky shore, because high winds will cause dangerous waves, particularly if it's directly into the shore that you're wanting to visit. If you're looking at winds of around 20 miles an hour, you should really be evaluating or re-evaluating the site and considering, is the site going to be heavily impacted? Is there another site that I could go to? If you're looking at winds of over 30 miles an hour, you should probably be just considering rescheduling the whole event. The other thing to consider with wind is that it will have a chill factor, particularly for young participants. The coast is just always that little bit colder than it is in land, so it's definitely worth considering, particularly if you've got a bit of wind coupled with rain. Now, rain is absolutely not a hindrance to getting out into the rocky shore and doing activities there. Some rocky shore activities can be brilliant in the rain. You've just got to consider the young people that you're working with and also the facilities that you have close to site. Do they have a space where they can eventually warm up and dry off, or are they going to be soaking wet for hours? There's a huge variety of different weather forecasts that you can use. Personally, I use the Met Office, but any reputable site, like the BBC, will give you a good indication of the weather to come. Another thing to consider is the state of the tide. So tidal information can be accessed for your local area online, but what's important to know about your site is if the tide impacts your access and egress to the site. And the last thing you want is to be down on the beach and to get cut off on your way back to the shore by the incoming tide. And this is one of those things that you learn from visiting your site on a couple of occasions and watching it over these few days. The other thing just to consider is soft sediment. So most rocky shores are rocky, that's what their predominant kind of substrate is, but some might have areas of thick mud, and the last thing again you want is to be stuck in that. So these are the things that you can pick up as you visit your site on a regular basis. So once you've considered the weather and the site you're going to use, the third thing you should be really considering once you get to the site is boundaries and where people can go. And that is really the same for all young people, whether they're young children or whether they're teenagers. The boundaries themselves can change and be flexible, obviously to suit your young people, but setting those clear boundaries before you begin any activities is really, really key. There's a big variety of ways you can physically set those boundaries. You can use coloured cones, coloured buckets, any kind of bright object you can use to mark those out. If you have additional staff members, or if you've got really responsible young people that you want to give that responsibility to, they can monitor the boundaries. Or also you can use natural environment to set your boundaries. Natural, maybe rock walls, tree lines, anything at all that is in your area can mark out a boundary. So this is our site that we use for rock pooling really commonly, and as you can see we've got a really nice clear bay here. So the boundaries I tend to use the natural rock formations unless I've got a particularly young group or maybe a particularly adventurous group, shall we say. So I use these natural walls that you can see on each side of the bay, and those are the boundaries that they can go to. And because going to the rocky shore, one of the best things about using this environment is that sense of adventure and that sense of freedom and excitement. So you do want to make room for that. So use your best judgment. Choose boundaries that you can still see your participants and see your young people and keep an eye on them, but also that gives them a little bit of freedom. And that's really just down to your best judgment. One of the other things to consider, again, before you begin any activities, is rules around access to the sea. And this will be different, again, depending on the young people you've got with you. In the right environment, if it's a calm day and the people and your students are wearing the right footwear, there's no reason that everyone can't go for a shallow paddle, no beyond welly depth though. But this is, of course, dependent on the conditions on the day and your students. You'll need to do a little bit of dynamic risk assessment on the day itself. One thing that's worth considering, if you're near to the coast and want to work around the coast quite a lot, is potentially the safety equipment that you bring along with you while you're working by the coast. So we at the FSC, we always carry a throw line when we're working around the coastal environment, and we have specific training from the Royal Lifesaving Society UK. So if you're by the coast and want to use it regularly, this might be something to consider. So the final thing to consider is the clothing and the footwear that your young participants are wearing for a day on the rocky shore. In terms of footwear, good soles are really important. You want a decent thick sole with a decent grip. The latest Gore-Tex fancy walking boots are absolutely not essential. Really what we recommend are just basic wellies. They're inexpensive, and also it means young people can go for a paddle and actually get into the water itself if the conditions are right. Walking boots and walking trainers are fine, again, as long as they've got that decent sole, but normal trainers and sandals and anything open-toed just really are a no-go. The other thing to consider is, of course, layers. The coast is just that little bit cooler than inland, so even on a nice sunny day, sometimes it can just be that little bit cooler. The wind chill can be a little bit more, so make sure a couple of layers and always a waterproof jacket are to hand. However, on the rare Scottish day where we get a nice summery day, take them with you, but they can stay in the rucksack. The same principles also apply to freshwater environments, and you should be considering all these different safety factors as well. Now we're going to go and look at some activities. So the first activity we're going to look at is something called a BioBlitz. The word BioBlitz basically just means trying to count or collect as many different species in a habitat as possible, normally in a set sort of time frame. Many outdoor centres like RSPB centres and wildlife trusts will have kind of public BioBlitz events during the summer that are really, really fun to go along with to and get involved with. However, you can absolutely run your own little mini blitzes in any environment you choose, and we're going to be looking at one on the rocky shore today. The competitive element of counting as many species as possible in a short period of time can really encourage engagement from young people. But what's even more rewarding often with this sort of activity is all that data that's potentially collected from a BioBlitz can be uploaded to numerous websites and citizen science projects. So it adds real value to the session and makes students feel like they're part of something bigger, because that data is going on to real scientific study. And we'll look at some of those examples later on in this video. The other thing that's really good with doing something like a BioBlitz is that it does tick off quite a few key components in the curriculum for excellence. For young students, just the ability to identify different species and recognise them from one another is really key, but also for older students, scientific investigation really helps tick some of those key boxes, particularly for science subjects. So to conduct a BioBlitz on a coastal environment or in a freshwater environment, you do not need a lot of kit, just a few basic bits and pieces. The first is some form of bucket, or something with a handle essentially that you can carry around with you. You can use proper buckets, or we sometimes use old big mayonnaise crates, and with a handle it's up to you, whatever you've got to hand. You can also use small nets, any kind of small rock pooling net will do. You can use a white tray, and that's to help inspect your animals once you've collected them from the rock pools. And then finally you need some form of ID guide so the students can work out what it is they're actually looking at. FSC Publications has made a couple of different rocky shore guides that you can buy from the website, and there's also loads of information available online on different species of rocky shore and freshwater creatures. When you begin your BioBlitz, the first thing to do is take your bucket down to the water. You can leave your trays and your boards or ID guides up at the top. You can use them later on when it comes to identifying your animals in a more stable and flat pit of ground. But take your bucket down to the water and fill it up with about 1/3 of water. You want enough there that you can safely cover the animals and make sure they're nice and comfortable, but also you don't want to be carrying around a full bucket of water and making yourself very tired. So do that first of all. We always recommend when you're doing a rocky shore BioBlitz or using activities on the rocky shore to start at low tide and kind of start as at the bottom of the shore and then slowly work your way up so that you can get all the diversity of creatures across the whole shore and you don't miss the really cool ones that are down at the bottom. Working with live animals can bring in some really good conversations with young people about animal welfare and also respecting the environment. And there's a couple of rules that we follow when we go out and collect animals on the rocky shore that we absolutely recommend you guys do the same. So when we collect our organisms, we only collect one different individual from every type of species that we find, okay? So if, one person finds a good crab and then someone else finds one that's slightly bigger, we'll put back the smaller one. So we only are taking one species, or one individual from each species, just to minimise the number of animals that we're collecting. We can handle the animals because that is a really, really good way, particularly for young people, to directly engage with the animals themselves. However, we do keep handling to an absolute minimum, and it should always be done within the water if possible, or just directly above it. And of course, being completely gentle and not kind of grabbing, poking, things like that with the organisms. Now, there are some animals that live on the rocky shore who have to be attached to rocks to survive. So things like limpets, anemones and barnacles, if you scrape them off a rock, it will kill them or it'll seriously damage them to the point where once we put them back, they'll be eaten or die later on. That doesn't mean we can't collect them. Simply what we recommend when you find an animal that's attached to a rock, like this anemone here, just pick up the rock itself. As long as it's nice and small, just pick that up and add it to your collection. The other thing that we recommend is when you're looking for organisms and you're turning over rocks and things like that in pools, we always recommend that we absolutely put the rocks back nice and gently to make sure that any other organisms that are living under there or on the underside of the rock are safe. And really we just advocate the countryside code of leaving no trace and being gentle with everything that we find and putting the animals back where we found them. BioBlitzes can last as long as you like them to, from 5 minutes to multiple hours. Just be aware of the tide coming in if you're spending a long time down on the shore. Once you finish your BioBlitz, you can bring your animals back up to the area where you've left your trays and ID guides, and you can start trying to identify them and look at them a little bit more closely. So you absolutely do not have to be an expert on rocky shore animals to run this kind of session. As I said before, there are a huge number of ID guides available either from FSC or there's loads of information online. And it's really much more empowering for the students and the young people to try and work out things for themselves rather than being told by an expert. It's absolutely something I advocate in my own teaching, even though I work on the rocky shore a lot. Someone comes up and asks me, what is this? I always tend to say, I don't know, let's work it out together and put it back on them and allow them to find things out for themselves. And it just makes the whole experience so much more rewarding. So there's loads of ways to differentiate what you're doing with young people, whether you've got young children or slightly older students. Once you've got your animals, there's loads of different activities that can be brought inside or done outside if you like. For young children, what we particularly like to do is have them create creature passports. So they make drawings of the organisms, they talk about things to do with how it lives, what it eats, where it lives, and they essentially create a little passport for each creature. And the other thing they can do is they can actually create their own ID guides. So once they've spent a bit of time looking at the different animals and thinking about all the different features that those animals have, they can make their own key. And that can then maybe even be passed on to other students that want to investigate the rocky shore, and they can use those guides to work out the animals that they find. For older students, you can really delve deeper into the species themselves. So rather than just finding out the common name, so a common starfish, they could look and try and find out the scientific name or the Latin name So for common starfish, something like Asterias rubens. They can really delve deep into the animal. They can find out, ecologically where it fits into food web systems, and they can look at the distribution, where it's found across parts of Scotland, if they found something rare, if they found something common. And again, they can also take a sort of a more artistic approach, but they could look at doing scientific drawings, so they can develop skills like using a scale bar, and they can annotate it with the adaptations, so the features that the organisms have, and how they use those features to survive in their habitat. So we'll have a little look now at some of the common species that you might find when you're rock pooling around any beach in Scotland. This first one, you might find, first species of crab, is a green shore crab, or just a shore crab. Because confusingly enough, sometimes they're not always green, and they range in their colour from kind of green to dark brown. Let go of the seaweed, please. There we are. So here we have a lovely individual of a shore crab there. So this is a fairly standard sized one, but you'll get them much smaller and much larger as well. They've got quite a wide carapace that you can see. So this is the carapace, the shell, and you can see it's got that dark brown colour. Now, one of the really cool things with shore crabs is you can often sex them and tell the difference between males and females using a really, really simple sort of a feature that they have on their underside called an abdominal flap. So this is a really cool individual here because you can see this one's got a kind of mound on the underside there. Now those are eggs, so we know for definite that this is a female, but if she didn't have eggs, we would look at this abdominal flap here. So this you can see is a nice big leaf shape there. So when she doesn't have eggs, that flap is enclosed and it's flat on her stomach. So we can look at that feature. Males, on the other hand, of course, don't have eggs, so they have a sharp-pointed triangle instead. So when you look for shore crabs, you can gently turn them over and look to see if they're males or females. So if you're really lucky, one of the species that you might find rock pooling is the common starfish, like this one here. So common starfish are nice and straightforward to identify, and they are very common, particularly down at really kind of low tides close to the water. And they've got 5 arms. They're normally sort of a light kind of orangey colour. They've got white speckles over the top. A really cool, slightly gross fact about common starfish is that they eject their stomach through their mouth. So their mouth is on the underside of their body here. It's just in the centre. They feed on things like mussels that live in 2 shells. And when they want to feed, they wrap their arms around those 2 shells, they prise it open, they spit their stomach out, and that goes inside the 2 shells and digests everything externally. So that's a good fact for both young and older students and participants. So the last one, the common species that we'll look at, is one that you'll find on any shore, and you can find them on any rock in high numbers on the middle shore, and this is a dog whelk. So this is a type of snail. The shell ranges in colour. This one's kind of a dark grey colour, but you get them in white and yellow as well. And they're quite a pointed shell. They're quite long and pointed. Now these are nicknamed driller killers because these organisms, or these animals, focus on prey items that live in a shell. So they have a drill that will drill through that shell. So they'll kind of latch themselves on, and it might be a limpet, it might be a mussel or a barnacle, latch themselves on, they'll extend that drill through this little channel that they've got at the front of their shell, and it'll drill through the shell slowly over time. It takes quite a while, and then once they've made a shell, they'll insert a proboscis, so essentially kind of a long feeding structure, and they'll release a range of chemicals that'll digest and turn the kind of the prey to mush, and then they'll suck it back in again. So yeah, there's lots of that sucking back in again feeding method on the rocky shore. So you can do a bioblitz like this in any freshwater environment, whether it's a pond, a river, a lake. There's a few extra things to consider. You don't have the consideration of the tides, thankfully, unless you're in an estuary environment. But the things to consider for freshwater would be things like the speed of the river and water speed, and potentially depth as well, because they can obviously get quite deep quite quickly. But you can do a bioblitz in any of those environments. To differentiate for older students, again, as well as kind of delving into individual species, you can treat a bioblitz as a whole scientific investigation, and they can look at the number of species that they find at the bottom of the shore, potentially compared with the top, or look at the full trend. How do things change as they work their way up the shore? Short expansion activity on a bioblitz can be to look at classification and grouping organisms together based on shared characteristics. For young students, this can be, they can group them together maybe into different parts of the tray, or into different buckets based on, if they're soft, or if they've got the number of legs, or if they've got claws, things like that. Any feature that they can identify, and they can group them together. Alternatively, for older students, they can think a bit more in detail about the certain groups, the absolute scientific groups that these organisms belong to. So whether they're a crustacean, a mollusk, or a chordate, or a vertebrate. One thing that's really clear when you do visit the coast or a river or a freshwater environment is not only that there's an abundance of interesting species, there's also an abundance of litter in this sort of environment as well, which is really not nice to see. Young people are told in school, do not litter. However, really bringing them to this kind of environment to see the connection of what happens when they actually drop litter is really, really powerful. Around 70% of all the litter dropped on land eventually makes its way out to the sea, and that's just because it slowly over time gets washed into river environments and then flows downstream. We as leaders can use a whole range of different activities and sessions to help connect people, young people, with this problem and help empower them to realise that they do have a responsibility for the environment, and they also actually can make changes, or they can help facilitate larger changes to their whole community and to the planet itself. Just doing litter picks and beach cleans themselves are a really worthwhile activity just in themselves, but we're going to be looking at a few sort of expansion activities that you can do at the end of a beach clean or a litter pick to really drive home that message of responsibility, and again target some key curriculum for excellence components as well. The first thing we can do is, using the litter that we've collected from a beach clean, is to create something called litter graphs. So we've got two different examples. The first one we're going to look at is a type of scatter graph almost, that we can create with the litter that's being collected. So you can see we've got our axes laid on the ground here. So we've made them out of natural materials. And what we are plotting is the time a bit of litter takes to break down against the impact it has to wildlife. So the axis along the bottom is our time, and then the axis going up, our y-axis, is the impact to wildlife. So we can plot a whole range of different materials on here. So if you're thinking of something like a plastic bag or a plastic bottle, something like that, that is going to take, as we know, a really, really, really long time to break down into its natural components. In fact, we almost don't know if they ever do break down to their natural components. They'll break down into smaller bits of plastic, but we're talking really about breaking down into natural components. So that piece of plastic is going to be placed way up at the extreme end of our bottom axis there, our x-axis. And then we have to consider the impact to wildlife. So something like a plastic bag, I'm sure many of you will be aware, plastic bags are really detrimental to wildlife, because sometimes organisms can become entangled in it, but also some animals like turtles mistake these plastic bags for their main food source, which is jellyfish. So again, incredibly damaging to wildlife as they are in their kind of natural state, but then even once they break down even further into those little microplastics, they can still be really detrimental. They can release chemicals into the water, and when they're further broken down and smaller, other animals can ingest them as well. So they end up at the extreme end of our x-axis and also at the extreme end of our y-axis as well. So really, really at the kind of worst state, if you like, of our graph. And this can be carried on. So your young people can pick the items that they've found and place them where they think they belong on their graph, thinking about how they impact the environment and how long it takes for them to break down. And what you tend to see developing is that items of plastic will end up in the worst places or the worst areas of the graphs. Things like glass takes a long time to break down, but it's a lot less reactive than plastic, and it doesn't really break down into dangerous microparticles. So while it takes a long time to break down, it's not quite as damaging to wildlife. And you can also plot natural materials on there as well, so seaweed and rocks and things, and you can really see that clear difference in how we impact the environment versus how kind of the impact of the environment, itself, how it doesn't kind of negatively affect itself. It all works in balance together. So as well as that sort of scatter graph that we made, you could also create a pie chart with your litter that you've collected from a beach clean. So we've made one here, and essentially what you do is the different sorts of litter materials that you pick up, you can group them into categories and include them in the section of the pie, and you can make your own sections of the pie for whatever you found or whatever you want to kind of target, I suppose. So we've kind of gone for sort of marine debris and rope, and we've gone for soft plastics, hard plastics, we've got glass, we've got metal, and we've also got clothing as well. But the young people can choose what categories they want to go into. You can do it broad or they could be narrow. It's completely down to them. Not only do these graphs target key numeracy skills that are really useful for young people, they also kind of create this really striking visual image of just how much we impact our environment, and really drives home that message of, regardless of if I drop a bit of litter, in my local park, it will end up in this environment, and it'll last and last and last. So it's a really, really sort of powerful message to use with young people. For older students, it can really easily be differentiated to try and target some of those graphing skills. You can look at labelling axes and adding scales and things like that. But another really interesting thing that you could potentially try and do with young or old students is you can sometimes work out where your litter has come from. So we once found a packet of chicken, or like a empty packet of chicken breast that had come all the way from France. And if you really spend a little bit of time, you could really look through your litter that you find, work out where it's come from, and almost plot maps, to show how far plastic can travel in particular. And again, kind of almost create a little project to showcase just how bad the plastic problem can be. The fact that it's interactive in the outdoors, even though it's graphs, can still be really, really fun and engaging for young people, but at the same time providing a really powerful and valuable message. So if you want to target sort of more artistic skills rather than numeracy skills, there are a huge variety of arts projects that you could use and create with the materials that you collect and with the litter that you collect, obviously ones that's had a bit of a clean. So a couple of projects that we have, we've used particularly cotton bud stands that groups have collected from litter picks when they visited our centre. And one of the things that we've made is a giant cotton bud out of little cotton buds to kind of highlight the cotton bud problem when people flush them down the toilet. And we've also made a small kind of dolphin replica model that has again been used, or has been made from the cotton bud stands that groups and young people have collected. So there's a huge variety of different things that can be created there. And again, if you're doing an arts project, it kind of creates this, long-lasting impact on a location. It's something that's there forever and can be used as a message for other young people that might come and go. So in terms of health and safety for litter picks, we absolutely recommend using reusable gloves or litter picks when it comes to actually picking up the litter itself. We also recommend, don't touch anything dangerous or sharp. If you're concerned about what your young people might be touching, if you've got particularly young kids that maybe can't differentiate between, what's safe and what's not, doing a targeted litter pick and focusing on one type of litter or a few different types of litter can help reduce that risk. And of course, thorough hand washing at the end of a litter pick is absolutely essential.
Okay, so there we have it. Even more engaging and straightforward activities you could do, and this time on the coast, on the rocky shore with your young people. So I'll be taking questions just in a moment. You still got a little bit of time to submit any questions if you'd like, and you can do it either on the email address, so send them over to questions@field-studies-council.org, or you can submit them in the live YouTube chat box, and I'll be answering them there. But just before we do that, let's have a little chat about some of the citizen science schemes that you could potentially get involved with doing outdoor work on the coast or in the freshwater environment with young people. So if you listened to the session yesterday, you'll have learned a little bit about citizen science. If you missed it, citizen science is this whole kind of concept that was set up in the 1990s to get young people or non-scientists or non-professionals involved with scientific research. So there's a whole range of different citizen science schemes set up around the country that target different areas of science, but there's a whole range that relate to sort of the outdoors and the environment and biology. And essentially what it means is you go out into your outdoor space, doing what you would normally do, but you collect data when you're doing it. And then you upload that data to a website, and that data then goes on to facilitate scientific research. So it's a great kind of idea to get involved with the young people, because it really adds value to what they're doing when they're out and about. And stuff like rocky shore bioblitzes or freshwater bioblitzes are the perfect sort of example where you are essentially collecting data already while you're out and about. All you have to do is then pop it onto a website or an app. So one particular one that we recommend for use with rocky shore environments is one called Shore Watch. Now this has been set up by the wildlife trusts, and what they are trying to do is they are trying to find as many different species and the number of species of rocky shore animals as they can around the whole coastline. So if you're going out and doing a BioBlitz anyway, you're already going to be identifying animals and looking at how many there are. So all you have to do is simply upload that to the website or send it to the wildlife trusts. So the way you can get involved with Shore Watch, if you go onto their website, you can find your local rep and you can get in contact with them to get involved. Now, if you're wanting to do more of a freshwater sort of BioBlitz study, what you can do is you can look at the Freshwater Habitats Trust. So they have a whole range of different schemes you can get involved with, some that run at different times of year. My personal favourite is during the springtime, they like you to go out and count frog spawn. So that could be a particularly nice one, obviously, to use with young people. So that's the Freshwater Habitats Trust. Now, there's a whole range of citizen science schemes that have been set up to deal with plastic pollution or litter. And there's a whole range across the country that are really good to get involved with, again, to give that sense of the bigger picture for young people. One that we particularly recommend is called Beach Watch, and that has been set up by the Marine Conservation Society. So it's a large scheme, and Beach Watch, during the summertime, they will run lots of local public beach cleans that you could go along and get involved with. And they have them all across the country run by different representatives from the Marine Conservation Society. And they also run one big event, normally during September time, called the Great British Beach Clean. That's, again, another really good scheme to get involved with. You go out during these set dates and you collect the litter and you then submit it to their website. However, aside from all these events that they host, they also have this scheme that runs across the entire year. You essentially can go onto their website and download a form, like a beach cleaning form, essentially, that gives you a little bit more information or requires a bit more information about the litter that you pick up. So it looks at the plastic that you collect, what type of plastic, how much of it, and it looks at the type of cans that you collect and what type they are and how many, and it just requires a little bit more detail from your litter picking rather than just the sheer amount of it. And so it's really, really easy to do. You could just go onto their website, download the form, and then when you're going out on a beach clean with your young people, they just fill in that form as they go, and that's providing really meaningful, useful data for Beach Watch and for the Marine Conservation Society, which is fantastic. Really, really good thing to get involved with. In terms of information, if you're looking for online resources, for rocky shore or for freshwater, species, if you just want to learn a little bit more, there's a whole range of websites that you can go to online. As mentioned in this video, the guides from the FSC are available. We have them for rocky shore. We also have them for freshwater environments too. And there's loads of information you can find about individual species from the Marine Conservation Society website or the Wildlife Trust website if you're going for freshwater environments too. So I think we're probably ready now to take questions. So Lorraine, if you want to fire me with them.
So our first one is, what contingencies should you plan for bad weather?
Okay, so I'll repeat that question. So it's, what contingency plans should you have in place for bad weather? And this is related particularly to rocky shore, but it is related to all the sessions that we've talked about in these last few days. We live in Scotland, we get bad weather, it happens. The first thing I would say, the main thing is to not be afraid of the weather. Absolutely, if the weather is potentially verging on dangerous, so like we talked about today, with high winds on the rocky shore, you really do need to consider safety. But a bit of rain is not going to be necessarily dangerous for anyone. You can still go out and do outdoor learning, even if it's a bit of rain. You just have to be prepared. So preparation really is the key. Rather than kind of alternative plans, the first thing you need to consider is, of course, what your young people are wearing, making sure they're properly kitted out in proper gear. And again, this doesn't have to be expensive. All they need is a decent waterproof jacket, decent layers, and decent footwear. So before going anywhere, making sure that they have proper kit and proper stuff that they're wearing. In terms of when you're planning your sessions, as I think we kind of mentioned before, making sure that you're planning a location to always have decent shelter and facilities available is really important, because then it means you don't have to, have an alternative plan in mind. You can just already control for those, potential things happening, and you can still go ahead with your first choice of environment. If those are still not an option, if it is a safety concern and you can't get out to your chosen area and you really need a contingency plan, a good idea is to have a second location as a backup if possible. That is, potentially not possible for everyone, but try and have a second location in mind that maybe has, you know, more shelter or different wind directions submitted to different weather conditions as a backup plan, just in case. But I think the first thing I would say is, as long as it's not a health and safety concern, you know, don't be afraid of getting outdoors, even if it's a little bit rainy, because from experience, the young people do still really, really enjoy it, as long as you just keep their mind off it and maybe have a flask of, you know, hot drink in your bag just in case. Okay, go for another question.
So our second one is, what types of animals might you expect to see in a freshwater environment?
Okay, cool. So that question there was, what types of animals might you expect to see in a freshwater environment? So we didn't really cover that too much in the video. There's a huge variety of creatures you can find in a freshwater environment. Really, really fascinating. Don't think that, you know, if you can't get to the coast, you can't, you know, you're not going to get as much excitement from a freshwater environment as you are from the coast. I had a group of young people, I think they were in 4th year, about this time last year, one of our first school groups that came to visit the centre, and we were doing pond dipping, and they were utterly fascinated. They were so fascinated by what they were seeing in their trays that at one point an osprey flew over my head, and I got very excited about this osprey, and I told them, I was like, oh, look at that osprey, and they were like, yeah, okay, and then just carried on looking at their freshwater trays. So it is excellent to use with young people. Now, the types of species you can get, loads of different insects. Larvae will go in and start off life in fresh water. So that's what you often find. You'll have mayflies, you'll have stoneflies, you might have dragonfly nymphs. You'll also might get water boatmen, caddisflies. Caddisflies are really interesting. So they are, again, sort of larvae of insects that go into the fresh water to survive, but they make themselves cases out of different materials that they find, and they kind of weave it together with the material, almost a bit like silk for spiders, and they weave it together, and then they kind of poke out these little cases. So they're very cool to find. As well as all the insects, you will also often get things like newts and frogs and shrimp and other things as well. Our pond that's only been established for a couple of years at our centre is chock-a-block with newts, which is absolutely fascinating for young people to see. So the whole variety you can find in freshwater. Don't think if you can't visit the coast that you can't find all these cool species as well. That's very cool. Next question.
So our next one is, are there any dangerous animals you need to be careful of on the rocky shore?
Cool. So that question was, are there any dangerous animals you have to be careful of on the rocky shore? Depending on the time of year, depending on the location, potentially there are some ones you should be aware of. The main one I would say for us up in Scotland is jellyfish. So during the summertime especially, you don't get live jellyfish in rock pools, but you do often get them washed up on the beach, and you know, they're dead on the beach, but they still have the potential to sting. Now, jellyfish, the one in particular that could be quite harmful if you get stung by it is the lion's mane jellyfish, and they are quite common. They're particularly common around here, so they could be potentially common around your area as well. And the thing I would just say to make sure of is, you know, no young person should be touching any part of the jellyfish. You might see videos online, you know, where people are touching the bell, the top part of the jellyfish. I think that's particularly prevalent in Finding Nemo as well. I would say it's best to just completely avoid all touching, because if some people think they can touch the top, then they might accidentally touch the wrong bit. And lion's mane stings can be really painful. They're not deadly or anything like that. There's no deadly jellyfish that will sting you around the UK, but they can be very sore stings. So I would just avoid all jellyfish and keep an eye out for those. Maybe make a rule, you know, before you go out on the rocky shore to not touch any jellyfish before you go. They're the main one I would consider. You do get certain species of fish that can be a little bit poisonous, or not a little bit, they can be poisonous, but they tend to be down on the far south coast of England, so you shouldn't have to worry about them in Scotland. Other things is crabs. Crabs can give you a nip if you grab them the wrong way, particularly there's a species called velvet swimmer crab, or the devil crab, that can give you a nasty nip, but it's not going to be anything seriously damaging. It'll just be a little bit sore. But the jellyfish is the main one thing to watch out for. Cool. Thank you very much. Next question.
I think this will be our last question. And what is the best way to ease young people into the rocky shore environment if they've never been before, and how can you channel their excitement into an activity?
Okay, so that question there was it's a little bit similar to one we had yesterday, is how can you ease young people into a rocky shore environment if they've never been before, but also how do you channel their excitement when they've just visited this area? So the first part of that question, I would say it's kind of, again, it's a little bit related to kind of what we discussed yesterday with our question, which was, you know, how do you maybe get to engage young people with insects when they're maybe not that interested? And this is one I would just say preparation is key. You know, really kind of spend some time. If you've got students that are a bit nervous maybe about going to the rocky shore, going to the coast, or they don't quite know what to expect, just lots of preparation before you visit. You know, research the area, learn about it, get them understanding it a little bit more, because once they can understand it properly, understand, excuse me, that it's not just this big scary thing, you know, they'll be more excited about going to it. And in terms of channeling their excitement, you know, this can be a challenging one, because of course when you get to this area particularly, everyone wants to scramble over the rocks and run around and, you know, exert themselves. And that's a good thing, as we said in the video, definitely encourage that, you know, as long as they're being safe, of course. But how you would channel their excitement, I think they need to be given a clear task. They need to be given a clear objective that they need to achieve. And I think this is where something like BioBlitz or a litter pick can come in really helpful. So the BioBlitz, of course, the objective is they've got to try and find as many different species as possible. So that's a clear objective that is going to kind of channel their interest and channel their excitement. And the other side of things with the litter pick is, if you want to channel that, you could focus on one particular type of litter rather than just generic litter that they have to go for. You know, so you can pick a particular thing, like, okay, we're only going to pick up plastic bottles. You know, the person that collects the most plastic bottles, you know, I don't know, gets an ice cream or something. Although don't maybe use, you know, food as an incentive. Maybe it's probably quite a good one actually, as an ice cream if you're by the coast. But you know, having a clear objective, a clear plan that they need to achieve helps to channel a little bit more, and definitely let them run around and enjoy themselves, because that's one of the nicest things about being on the coast, is that sense of freedom. But yeah, a clear objective I think is really key there. I think that was our last one. Yep, so that's our last question there for this session. So now I'm going to introduce our homework that you've got for this session. So if you've joined for the previous sessions, you'll know we're going to be setting a homework task for each section that myself and, you know, your colleagues at Barnardos would really like for you to try and achieve. And they all just kind of utilise the sessions and things that we've learned in these videos. So for this one, what we would like you to do is we would like you to draw up a mock plan for a half-day rocky shore session that you might use with your young people. Okay, so it should include you know, location information. It should include safety information and planning, but it should also include the activities that you want to do and how long you want them to last for. So a half-day mock plan for how you might run a rocky shore activity with your young people, and you can upload your progress to our Padlet website. So the Padlet website link is in the description to this video. So if you look to the bottom of this video, there should be a little box that maybe says see more or something like that. And if you click on that, you'll find the link to the Padlet in there. And that has all the resources we've been talking about in this series of videos. And that's where you can upload your homework progress to. So make sure to check that out if you haven't looked at it already. But that's pretty much us for today. So we're on our final session tomorrow. It'll be the same time tomorrow, 10:30. And tomorrow we are looking at bushcraft and in the outdoor skills for wilderness in the outdoors. So it's a fantastic one that we're finishing up on. Really make sure you tune in for that. We're going to be looking at foraging skills, you know, how to light a fire, how to cook with young people over a fire. It really is. We've saved the best till last, so do not miss out on tomorrow. It's going to be fantastic. But thank you very much. We really hope you've enjoyed this session and all the other sessions as well. We will see you at the same time tomorrow, 10:30. Thank you very much.